We will now move on to the question and answer portion of this presentation. As we normally do, we would like to take your questions in groups of 3. So please make sure that you identify yourself and the news organization that you're with. I see some questions over here in the front, and we'll try to get to these as well. The gentleman here right at the corner, there's a woman here with a white scarf on, and then here in the second row, a man with a blue shirt.
Thank you. My name is Julian O'Halloran, and I'm from BBC Current Affairs. Thanks for the excellent presentation. Can I pick you up on the point of climate change slipping off the policy radar? There's certainly a perception this has happened in this country. The perception is the government feels it cannot afford to go faster than its neighbours on dealing with climate change, tackling it. To what extent do you think this is an accurate perception by government, this business of the affordability of measures to battle climate change?
Aura Sabadus, ICIS. You were talking about the revolution sparked by the unconventional oil and gas supplies. To what extent do you think we're going to move from an oil-indexed price, and what will it be replaced by? And secondly, you were talking about the importance of Iraq. To what extent do you think Iraq will displace Central Asian producers, particularly interested with a link to Turkey and Europe? Thank you.
Tim Webb from The Times. On the point you made about the US and the prediction that it will become the world's largest oil producer by 2017 and the largest gas producer by 2015. I know 2 years ago you did a big piece on the gas glut and the impact of shale gas in North America, but how much have you changed your projections by, or kind of brought forward the kind of the date or forecast when the US will become the world's largest producer, and how will that impact trade patterns in terms of all the imports now the US won't be buying? And also, has it surprised you the kind of speed that the US is growing? Thanks.
I'll start answer the first question, and then Fatih will take up with the others, and maybe has something to add to my answer to number 1. Climate change slipping off the agenda, and does it have to do with affordability? I think this is true. It has also to do with the debt crisis Europe is still in. That has to be solved. It will be solved one way or the other, but if it is solved, then the problems with the climate will still be there. So I think it's just a matter of time before the whole issue comes back to the political agenda. What we can see at this moment in Germany and in the Netherlands, Germany phasing out of nuclear and filling the gap with coal-generated power and an extra impulse on renewables. What we can see in the Netherlands, where the new government puts in place a 400 million extra subsidy on biomass. These things show that there is also a different trend. But let's be honest, if costs of renewables come down, for instance in solar PV, then of course subsidies have to go down as well. And that's why I think it's very wise what the United Kingdom did, because you can't over-subsidize. That would really be a very bad sign. Then my last remark, it is about costs. Yes, it costs money. That's true, but it brings jobs as well. And then people tell me, well, why? All these PV panels, they are produced in China. Yes, produced. But all the rest of the value chain is realized in countries, in Europe, in countries everywhere else in the world. So I think the answer to your question is a little bit more complicated than just a simple yes or no.
Okay, let me then go to the other 2 questions. First of all, we think that the oil index pricing will be more and more under pressure, and we have seen that some countries have already made improvements even in the existing contracts, and we expect that there may be tough negotiations between the exporters and importers in the new long-term contracts, and the hands of the importers will be stronger. But I think it is far too early to think that the oil index pricing will be over, but we will see, we expect more and more flexibility in that respect in favor of, again, importers. About Iraq, as I said, about half of the growth in the global oil production will come from Iraq, and when this growth comes, of course, there will be implications of this growth, and it is fellow producers in OPEC and in Central Asia and elsewhere. And it will depend on the discussions between the producers, but if Iraqi government, Iraqi colleagues would say their fellow producers that they, my fellow producers, you have been producing oil and exporting oil years and years, and making a significant amount of revenues, and we have not been doing this for a long time, and now it is our time to export oil and reconstruct our economy. If they make such a statement, I think they would have a point there. In terms of the gas production, Iraq gas production will be about up to 90 BCM. A significant chunk of it is in the north of Iraq, and when we, in our book, you will see, we made a cost analysis, and the gas coming from north of Iraq through Turkey to Southeast Europe, or Europe in general, has a major cost advantage vis-a-vis the some other projects, including one coming from Central Asia. But we also know that the economics is not the only factor which determines the viability of a project, if it is going to materialize or not. About gas and the US, are we surprised? We are surprised like everybody, but I think we are the least surprised one, because we said 4 years ago that a silent revolution is starting in the United States. It was us in the view. And now that silent revolution became loud and implications for everybody. But what surprised us is something that many people still think, especially in Europe, that the gas, what is happening in the gas markets will not affect Europe. It will affect Europe, even though if there is not even 1 BCM of gas is not, unconventional gas is not produced in Europe. In fact, it is already affecting Europe. What happened, you saw the picture I showed, the US electricity generation. The cheap gas got in substantially in the last 5 years, and the coal went out. In the last 5 years, 5 years ago, the share of coal in the US electricity generation was almost 50%, and it is today about 32%. And this, we are talking about a huge market, and it's a huge change. But what happened is that coal left the United States, came to Europe, and as a result of that, last year, we saw that in Europe, huge coal consumption growth, the second to China in the world, with significant implications. And this is mainly because of what happened in the shale gas in the United States. And this will continue to affect, and we think that in Europe, the gas demand will come to the 2010 levels only back in 2020. So there will be a major, significant difference there. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take some questions in the back. There's one on the far corner there. There's a man in a tan blazer here. And then there's a third one, a gentleman with a white collar.
My name is Kjell Louis Pedersen from Månevisen. Fatih, could you please elaborate on what you said about the need for smart subsidies in the renewables, and to what extent the trade disputes about Chinese solar panels at the World Trade Organization, whether they are part of these smart subsidies?
Yeah, sorry, I'm Daniel Sullivan from Energy Intelligence. Just kind of scanning the outlook today, I can see that with Iran, you presume with Iran that the current state of interdiction of exports continues and hardens into definite capacity loss until about 2020. And in the medium term oil market report recently, you kind of had to presume as part of your method, well, Iran's just locked out of these export markets right now for the duration of the MTOMR. Is it fair to say that any kind of resolution now to Iran, whether it's some kind of unimaginable political solution or Iranian exports coming back to the world through a back door to Asia or whatever, is that now a kind of major risk to your forecasts going forward, both in the medium and the longer term? If the Iranian situation normalizes faster than you're presuming, would that kind of dramatically loosen global balances beyond what you've already projected? Thanks.
Finance. Two questions. Firstly, you've talked about energy efficiency and how that can help to delay the lock-in date. How realistic is that that can be done this quickly? And secondly, we're still left with the problem of having to try and meet the 2-degree target. What needs to be done to stimulate the investment to make that happen?
Okay. Well, I'll just answer your question, and Fatih will take the other two. Yes, Iran is there, and there are sanctions. Yes, and the sanctions, they have a certain objective. Yes, and this objective is there, and that's a political one. And what we can see that it takes some oil out of the market. We have now 1 million barrels a day, maybe a little bit more. Yes, maybe a little bit more up till now. We'll have our oil market report our monthly oil market report being released this week. But this report, this World Energy Outlook, is not only about Iran. And Iran is not the only country in the world that produces oil. At this moment, what we can see in North Dakota, for instance, in the United States, that it produces 600,000 barrels a day. That's what those barrels were not there a year or 1.5 years before. My second remark is, let's have a look at Iraq and how fast Iraq will come to the market, because they want to bring this oil to the market. And not only because they want to earn the money, but they want to do something with the money. It's part of their reconstruction of the country. They need it. And they'll find different transport routes. You can see it already now. They are building different transport routes. What we project between now and 2020, 2025, that the biggest part of the growth in the oil supply will come from non-OPEC countries, from non-OPEC resources. And after that, OPEC countries will come back and will overtake the other ones again. So why do I give you this answer? Because to show you that, well, and you know that as well as I do, that the oil market is developing and that distribution, that supply is coming from different resources, and that importers and industry is taking up measures, and that other exporters are filling the gap, and they like to fill the gap because they get a lot of money out of it.
Thank you. Let me start with the climate change and efficiency questions and go to the subsidies. Now, how realistic is that we can see 5 years of a delay as a result of efficiency policies? I cannot guarantee that it will happen, but what we see for the first time, a growing momentum in many countries to push the energy efficiency button. For example, United States, we have not seen many years US looking at the efficiency side. Once again, I wanted to highlight that what is happening in the United States in terms of import dependency reduction, it is not only as a result of the growth in oil production, but as a result of improvements on the efficiency. And US has a huge improvement to make to be in line with Europe, to be in line with Japan and the others. China takes this very seriously, and it is one of the key cornerstones of the 11th five-year plan. Japan put a new policy in place after Fukushima, 10% improvement in the electricity consumption. And finally, Europe recently passed a directive, European Energy Efficiency Directive is in its place. So they're encouraging science, and in addition to those, there will be a growing push from the side of the economics. Governments will do it, not only because they want to address the climate change and so on, but economics will push them there. Now, the question is why it is not happening. So it is so obvious, our numbers are so self-evident. It is not happening because energy efficiency requires a different type of organization to push the policy. Normally, if there's an energy policy to push, it is always the energy ministry who pushes the thing. But in the context of energy efficiency, there should be a very well coordinated efforts of the energy ministry, finance ministry. Even finance ministry may be even more important than the energy ministry here. Then you have the construction ministry, you have the transportation authorities, and industry ministry, and the others. So governments, it will be in our book you will see, we have 6 major recommendations to governments. If governments want to push the energy efficiency button, they need to be organized in a different way. And if they do it, I think they will definitely push the energy efficient world scenario we put it forward, and this will definitely help to address the climate change, and in an economically sound way. This is the thing. And it also refers to the question that was asked before. In UK, in many countries, energy efficiency can help to address climate change without having impact on the economy. How realistic is to reach the 2 degrees target? I think it is the chances are getting slimmer and slimmer, and every year we are here, perhaps I should say that we are less and less giving you good, the bright numbers, but we still keep our hope, and we hope to see that the governments change their position, because we need a governmental support here to address the climate change. In terms of subsidies, with the smart subsidies, I meant perhaps you choose the projects that you subsidize very, very carefully, whether or not they will be able to provide the significant returns to the investors after some years. But there are some projects which are definitely condemned to rely on subsidies only throughout their lifetimes. So in the times of the austerity, governments have to make a decision here, and to go for the projects which are more economically viable than the ones which would enjoy substantial amount of subsidies throughout their lifetimes. And it is what we meant with the smart subsidies. But once again, we need renewables. We need renewables to address the climate change and the energy security challenges.
Gentleman with an orange tie here, and David here.
That's okay.
Okay. We'll get you next.
Question from the FT. You say that the US is going to overtake Saudi Arabia, but I think you also mentioned that Saudi Arabia could come back later on and actually again overtake the US as the largest producer. Why is that? Is that something to do perhaps with the fact that decline rates in unconventional fields in the US are maybe higher than in conventional fields? Or on what are you basing your projection that Saudi will come back? Thank you.
Amir Paivar, BBC Persian. I know you deal with energy economics, but I'm really curious about one of the conclusions you have here about the changing outlook for energy production and use and how it will impact geopolitical balances. Now, we will ask these questions to politicians and geopoliticians as well, but I'm curious to know from an economist's point of view, what are these major shifts in geopolitical balances you think based on your analysis? It kind of seems to me that the Middle East is being thrown into the lap of the Asian consumers and the rest of the world kind of independent and self-sufficient with the picture we have from the US right now.
Fatih, David Strawn, freelance. You mentioned, suggested in your presentation that trucks were almost as big a problem as cars, which I found surprising. You would think there'd be very, very many fewer trucks than cars. So could you unpack that a bit? Why are they such a threat? How big a threat do you think they are? And what should the technology and policy priorities be?
Just a small kickoff for the start of answering of your question. Yes, you're right. There are no energy islands. No country is an island. Even if it's an island, it's not an island. And that is because, as Fatih rightly pointed out, that what happens in the United States has its influence on trade flows, has its influence in Europe, has its influence everywhere else. What happens in Japan with the phasing out of nuclear has its influence because also on trade flows, because much more gas, oil and coal is needed than before. So that's one thing, all the trade flows, and I think it was in one of your charts on gas was very explicitly shown how it will influence trade flows. I think trade flows is one of the very important geopolitical shifts. There's also a geopolitical shift in gravity center. And I would like to point out what Fatih told us about the position of Iraq, where there is a very strong axe between Baghdad and Beijing, not only in amount of money, investments coming from China in Iraq, but also the other way back when it comes down to oil and gas from Iraq going into China. And that's a major shift. Well, and if it's really going to come through, and we think it's going to come through, that the big number of oil isn't needed anymore in the United States because there will be a growing import independency, it will shift to different markets. And then the question, of course, is what other kind of attention, political attention, will shift to the other markets as well. Well, we are not a political organization, we are an energy, so the only thing we can do is point out what this means for the shifts in trade, for the shifts in interests. And that's what we showed. And of course, it has also, and I think this is a very important one, sometimes forgotten, there is a shift in competitiveness. If electricity prices are really as low as we project them to be in the United States and in China, but also in the United States, it will have a major impact on the return of industry to the United States.
If I can look at the other two questions, yes, 2017, U.S. is overtaking Saudi Arabia and being the largest oil producer of the world, and it may well change in the future as well. There are two reasons, Guy, why it can change. The first one is that the bulk of the growth of the U.S. oil production is coming from the light tight oil, and the light tight oil resources are poorly known. And if you look at the projections of many institutions, we have the modest growth we expect from the light tight oil, about 4 million barrels per day by 2020. And our projections afterward for the light tight oil, the growth is much less pronounced, and we expect that the growth of light tight oil may not grow as it is for the first 10 years as a result of not having enough resources. So if not new resources are discovered, and plus, this is a bit interesting, plus if the prices are not as high as today, which requires much higher prices, the light tight oil compared to Saudi oil, then we may see that the Saudi Arabia coming back and being the first producer again. So this will be mainly driven by the competition between the US and Saudi Arabia, the level of prices, and the availability of unconventional oil in the United States. About trucks, now our projections show that first of all, trucks are not a threat, David, especially if you don't cross the road. The problem is here with the trucks is like the cars, they are consuming a lot of oil, and in Asia, with the growing construction and the freight needs, we expect that the oil consumed by trucks reach the cars in about 20 years of time. But why we did highlight in our work is because the public policy attention on efficiency is almost solely concentrated on the car efficiencies. So So therefore, there are not much policies on the trucks. Therefore, we wanted to highlight this. It is as important as cars and require attention from policymakers to address the efficiency, both in terms of the weight, in terms of the size of the engine and other things for the trucks as well.
This will be our last round of questions, I'm afraid. This gentleman here in the front, the gentleman over on that side in the front, and the woman in the fourth row.
Should I go? Sohei Deus, Japan's Kyodo News Agency. So the new energy outlook has acknowledged the shift in certain countries about the nuclear policy. Is the IEA actually worried about the repercussions of some countries cutting too far too fast, or should they actually do more? Thank you.
Hi, Derek Brower from Petroleum Economist. You mentioned on your first slide that there's 1.3 billion people still without electricity. And then the next slide, there's rest of non-OECD where demand doesn't seem to grow very much. I'm curious about what happens to these, a fifth of the world's population here, because if I presume they're in the rest of non-OECD and their demand for energy doesn't seem to be growing over the forecast period. Thank you.
Siu Hua from Argus. I've got two questions. How successful do you expect US gas producers to drive exports despite domestic demand? And also a second question on China. Do you expect Chinese shale gas and unconventional gas production to play a big role in its energy mix? And does the IEA have any projections? Thank you.
Let me start with the first question on the nuclear. First of all, as I said, we have lowered our nuclear capacity expansions by 10% compared to last year, and there are two reasons behind it. One is the policy decisions made by Germany, Switzerland, Japan, and even the recent statement by France. This is the one. And the second one is, this is policy. The second one is economics. As a result of Fukushima, there are much stricter safety regulations in many countries which increase the cost of nuclear power plants, and the availability of cheap gas and cheap coal make also some negative implications on nuclear power's economics as well. So, but to be honest with you, as our executive director said in the beginning in her opening remarks, we are worried about what happens with the nuclear energy, because if we mention the 2 degrees issue, in the absence of nuclear energy, it will be completely impossible to reach the 2 degrees. And in the countries like Japan, if the nuclear energy is out of the picture and if it is replaced by LNG, and this year we expect the more than 10% growth in the Japanese LNG demand, and renewables which require subsidies, you saw the electricity prices in Japan, it will be even much higher than others. So therefore, this is, we are concerned about the implications on the economy of those countries and the climate change. Of course, it is up to the governments to decide what they want to do, but it is our job to tell the governments what we think and what will be the consequences. About the 1.3 billion people, there are 2 areas in the world which makes the 1.3 billion the biggest chunk of it. One is the Sub-Saharan Africa, the other one is the South Asia. In this South Asia part, we see, in South Asia is India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, basically. We see an improvement in India, but still today 300 million people have no access to electricity in India. And we expect that South Asia will improve a bit, but Sub-Saharan Africa will be still in a very, very difficult shape. And therefore we think this 1.3 billion people today, even though you saw that picture, what happens in the next 25 years will go down only down to 1 billion people in 2035. And we think this is economically, socially, and morally unacceptable. The last point about the U.S. gas exports. U.S. We expect is going to export gas around 2018, and may well have the implication of exporting more beyond that. And but this will depend on the production prospects in the United States and the regulation at home. That I don't, we cannot know by now. But when it comes to China, unconventional production is about, we expect come to about 230 BCM by 2035. And this is mainly driven by the huge resource base in China, plus Chinese government is giving significant amount of subsidies on the shale gas production. And again, in the 11th five-year plan, Chinese government set significant targets on the shale gas production, and therefore shale gas growth in China may well help to reduce country's gas import dependency. So these are some comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This concludes our presentation of the World Energy Outlook 2012. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.